A ceasefire deal just moved forward in Gaza. Iran didn't want it to happen. Iranian officials reportedly told Hamas directly not to sign. Hamas signed anyway. This connects directly to the war between the United States and Iran we've been covering, since the group at the center of this Gaza deal is one of Tehran's longest-running regional partners. Here's what Trump actually announced. On Thursday, Trump said the Board of Peace, the international body he created to oversee the Gaza ceasefire, had reached what he called a historic agreement for the complete disarmament of Hamas and other armed groups in Gaza. He described it as a major milestone in his 20-point Gaza plan, one that calls on Hamas to surrender its weapons and destroy its tunnel network. That 20-point plan itself dates back to the original ceasefire agreement, brokered with the involvement of Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey, which ended more than 2 years of war between Israel and Hamas following the group's October 2023 attack on southern Israel. Under the agreement, Israeli forces will withdraw as disarmament is completed, with a new international stabilization force working alongside a newly formed Palestinian police force to take over security responsibility. As of Thursday evening, neither Hamas nor Israel had publicly confirmed the deal on the record. The Palestinian Islamic Jihad, another armed group operating in Gaza and party to the original ceasefire, said reports of the agreement were inaccurate. Now here's the detail that connects this directly to the war we've been covering. According to Axios, and confirmed to the Times of Israel by a US official, Hamas representatives met with officials from Iran's Revolutionary Guard during a recent visit to Iran for the funeral of former Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. That same US official said Iran tried to convince Hamas not to sign this disarmament deal. Hamas, according to that official, chose not to listen. A separate US official described Iran as a wild card in the broader situation, explaining that while Tehran counseled Hamas against the deal, it currently isn't in a position to offer the group much real support, because it remains consumed by its own ongoing conflict with the United States and Israel. Let's walk through what the disarmament process actually looks like on paper. US and Board of Peace officials, speaking to reporters without being named under White House guidelines, described a process happening in phases. Within the next 2 weeks, Gaza's police force is expected to begin turning over weapons to the technocratic Board of Peace-backed administration now forming in the territory. That first phase doesn't include the vast majority of Hamas's actual fighters, and it doesn't cover heavy weaponry. The surrender of heavier weapons and the dismantling of Hamas's tunnel infrastructure is expected to come later, in a process officials estimated could take somewhere between 200 and 350 days. Officials briefing reporters weren't able to offer firm timelines for when Palestinian Islamic Jihad or other armed factions in Gaza would be included in that same disarmament process. Israel is also expected to halt broader military operations and targeted killings inside Gaza under this arrangement, according to a Board of Peace official, with an exception carved out for cases involving what's described as an imminent threat. That same official said all military activity in Gaza from both Israel and Hamas would need to cease under the agreement, a two-sided requirement that goes beyond simply disarming one side of the conflict. The skepticism around this deal isn't limited to Iran's failed attempt to block it. A US official said Israel has remained deeply skeptical throughout, doubting Hamas's genuine willingness to give up its weapons or fully relinquish behind-the-scenes control of Gaza, even while Washington kept Israel consulted at every step of the negotiation. That skepticism matters because Israel's own cooperation is required for the withdrawal half of this agreement to actually happen, meaning Hamas disarming on paper doesn't automatically guarantee Israeli forces leave Gaza on the timeline this announcement implies. This announcement also arrives 9 months after the original US-brokered ceasefire was signed, with the specific issue of disarmament being the piece that had kept negotiations largely deadlocked since then. In other words, this is being presented as a breakthrough on the single hardest, most contested part of an agreement that's already taken the better part of a year to get even this far. There's other Iran-related news from the same day worth including here. The United States imposed new sanctions targeting networks accused of supporting Iran's Mahan Air, an airline Washington says has been used to transport Revolutionary Guard personnel and weapons. Mahan Air has been a recurring target of U.S. sanctions for years, given its alleged role as a logistics arm for Iranian military and proxy activity across the region. And this latest round adds to that existing pressure rather than representing an entirely new form of action against the carrier. Separately, former Vice President Mike Pence said Thursday that Iran had squandered its opportunity to reach a deal with the United States, arguing it's time for the US and Israeli militaries to, in his words, finish the job against Tehran. Pence currently holds no official position in the administration, so his comment reflects his own political stance, rather than a government policy statement. But it's a notable voice adding to the pressure directed at Iran on the same day this Gaza news broke. And it illustrates how commentary from prominent Republican figures outside the administration continues shaping the public conversation around this war. So what should we actually take from Iran's failed attempt to stop this deal? Start with the plain read. Iran has spent years, and by some accounts decades, supplying money, weapons, and technical support to Hamas, a relationship Hamas's own leadership has publicly and gratefully acknowledged in the past. A former Hamas political leader once thanked Iran directly and publicly for supplying weapons, financial backing, and technical support during an earlier round of conflict with Israel, describing the relationship in explicitly grateful terms at the time, language that stands in sharp contrast to Hamas apparently disregarding Iran's advice on this specific, more recent decision. Iran's own supreme leader has separately called on Muslim nations more broadly to support Palestinians through military and financial means, framing that support as a religious and political obligation rather than a simple transactional alliance. For Tehran to counsel its own long-supported proxy against a major decision and have that proxy proceed anyway is a visible sign that Iran's practical leverage over Hamas has limits, especially at a moment when Iran's own resources and attention are stretched thin by its direct war with the United States. That doesn't mean the Iran-Hamas relationship is over, or that Iran's broader influence in the region has collapsed, but it does mean this specific decision didn't go the way Tehran reportedly wanted it to. It's worth being careful about the layers of sourcing here too. The claim that Iran actively lobbied against the deal comes from a US official speaking to Axios, confirmed to another US official speaking to the Times of Israel, not from an Iranian government statement or a Hamas statement confirming that specific conversation took place. We don't have Iran's own account of what was discussed at that meeting or confirmation from Hamas about why it ultimately decided to proceed despite whatever Iran advised. That's a reasonably well-sourced claim by the standards we've applied throughout this war, coming from officials speaking on condition of anonymity under established guidelines, but it still isn't a fully independently verified account from all sides involved. It's also worth noting the setting where this alleged conversation took place, a funeral for Iran's former supreme leader, rather than a formal diplomatic or military planning meeting, which adds a layer of informality to how this specific piece of pressure was reportedly applied, even if the underlying message conveyed was serious. The disarmament deal itself carries its own uncertainty, separate from the Iran angle entirely. Neither Hamas nor Israel had confirmed it on the record as of Thursday evening. One armed faction has already disputed the reporting outright. The timeline for the hardest parts, heavy weapons, and tunnel infrastructure spans up to nearly a year, with officials unable to guarantee firm dates. Announcing an agreement is not the same as completing one, something this specific ceasefire process has already demonstrated once, given that this disarmament breakthrough is only happening now, 9 months after the broader ceasefire was first signed. Senior Board of Peace officials have described the negotiations leading to this specific breakthrough as taking months of what they called delicate work. Language that itself suggests this agreement was neither quick nor guaranteed at multiple points along the way, and that similar delays could just as easily affect the implementation phase now beginning. Here's where this leaves things. Trump has announced a board of peace agreement for the complete disarmament of Hamas and other armed groups in Gaza, with Israeli withdrawal tied to that process. Iran reportedly urged Hamas not to accept the deal, according to US officials, and Hamas proceeded regardless. Neither Hamas nor Israel has formally confirmed the agreement, and Palestinian Islamic Jihad has disputed the reporting. The full disarmament process could take the better part of a year, with the hardest component still lacking a confirmed schedule. On the same day, the US added sanctions tied to Iran's Mahan air, and a former vice president publicly called for finishing the broader military campaign against Tehran. Taken together, this is a week where a long-stalled piece of a separate but related conflict moved forward specifically without Iran's blessing, while the direct war between the US and Iran continued on its own separate track with no sign of a comparable breakthrough. That contrast, progress in one theater Iran has influence over but doesn't control, and continued deadlock in the theater where Iran is a direct combatant, says something about where Tehran's leverage currently sits across the region as a whole. We're not going to guess whether this deal holds up over the coming months, but we do want to ask you, when a government's own longtime proxy ignores its advice on a major decision, how much does that tell you about how much control that government actually has left over the groups it's spent years supporting? And does that change how you think about Iran's broader position in the region right now?